look at lesson 6, our final lesson in our study of the day of the Lord. In this lesson, we're going to look at Zephaniah chapter 3, the final chapter in the book of Zephaniah. We've looked at chapter 1 and its theme of the day of the Lord bringing complete destruction, the day of the Lord being near. And then in chapter 2, we looked at the sacrifice that God had prepared in Bozrah upon the mountains of Israel, that specific moment at the second coming of Jesus where he destroys Israel's enemies, the desolation of the Middle East. And then also what we're going to look at today, here in this lesson, chapter 3, as the idea of the dawn of salvation. And so let's look at it together as we finish off this class, the day of the Lord. In the first 7 verses of chapter 3 of Zephaniah, we see the darkness before the dawn. Remember how I mentioned that the book of Zephaniah is a book of vivid contrast between the blessing and salvation of God and also his wrath and his judgment. And so we see this stark contrast here, especially in chapter 3. In the first 7 verses being very dark, full of judgment and destruction. Verse 1, "Woe unto her that is filthy and polluted to the oppressing city. She obeyed not the voice. She received not correction. She trusted not in the Lord. She drew not near to her God. Her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are evening wolves. They gnaw not at the bones till the morrow. Her prophets are light and treacherous persons. Her priests have polluted the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. The just Lord is in the midst thereof. He will not do iniquity. Every morning doth he bring his judgment to light. He faileth not, but the unjust knoweth no shame. I have cut off the nations. Their towers are desolate. I made their streets waste, that none passeth by. Their cities are destroyed, so that there is no man, that there is none inhabitant. I said, Surely thou wilt fear me, thou wilt receive instruction, so their dwelling should not be cut off. However, I punished them, but they rose early, and I corrupted all their doings." So God is bringing kind of a final woe upon Jerusalem. The city that should have known better, the city that should have trusted in their God. This is similar to Amos's pronouncement of judgment upon all of the nations surrounding Judah, and then focusing on the judgment that Judah itself deserves. If you remember in chapter 2, we looked at all of these surrounding areas in the Middle East, all of the Philistine cities, places like Ethiopia, places like Nineveh and Assyria. And now God is focusing just these verses here on the city of Jerusalem, although it's not mentioned by name here within these verses. And then in verses 8 through 13, the wait is over. The judgment is done. Salvation is here. "Therefore wait ye upon me, saith the Lord, until the day that I rise up to the prey. For my determination is to gather the nations, that I may assemble the kingdoms, to pour upon them mine indignation." You know how the Antichrist, he brings his armies together in the place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon, okay, Har Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo, the campaign of Armageddon. They're not brought there just because the Antichrist wants them there. They're not brought together from all over the world just so that they can fight against Israel. They're brought together ultimately so that God can pour his wrath and his judgment upon them. "Gather them together to pour upon them mine indignation," verse number 8, "even all my fierce anger, for all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. For then I will turn to the people a pure language, that they may call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent." We see this kind of a contrast between the judgment and now it's a turning point. To the judgment is completed, and now it's the salvation of God's people. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. In that day shalt thou not be ashamed for all thy doings, wherein thou hast transgressed against me. For then I will take out of the midst of thee them that rejoice in thy pride, and thou shalt no more be haughty because of my holy mountain. His holy mountain, Jerusalem, Mount Moriah. I will also leave in the midst of thee an afflicted and poor people, and they shall trust in the name of the Lord. They shall call upon his name. Just like what we talked about in the book of Zechariah, chapter 12. When they see him, they say, "This is my God." They mourn and they weep bitterly. They look upon him whom they have pierced, and shall mourn for him as one mourns for his only son. And so, we need to rejoice in the Lord. And this is kind of like the brightest aspect, the brightest point in the book of Zephaniah, verses 14 through 20. That we should rejoice in the Lord. His salvation is here. Sing, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O Israel. Be glad and rejoice with all thy heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord hath taken away thy judgments. He hath cast out thine enemy. The King of Israel, even the Lord, Jehovah, the King of Israel, Jehovah, is in the midst of thee. This is Jesus himself, God in human flesh, ruling from Jerusalem, setting up his 1,000-year millennial kingdom on the earth. Thou shalt not see evil any more. In that day it shall be said to Jerusalem, Fear thou not, and to Zion, Let not thine hands be slack. The Lord thy God in the midst of thee is mighty. He will save. He will rejoice over thee with joy. He will rest in his love. He will joy over thee with singing. I will gather them that are sorrowful for the solemn assembly, who are of thee, to whom the reproach of it was a burden. Behold, at that time will I undo all that afflict thee. I will save her that halteth, and will gather her that was driven out. I will get them praise and fame in every land where they have been put to shame. At that time I will bring you again, even the time that I gather you. For I will make you a name and a praise among all people of the earth, when I turn back your captivity before your eyes, saith the Lord. Now, the last couple of verses that we read, you might not think of such happy things when you think of the day of the Lord, but it is nevertheless part of it. It is the result of it. The day of the Lord's anger, the day of the Lord's wrath, the day of the Lord's vengeance. It will come. And after it is accomplished, after it is completed, that second coming of Christ where he destroys the enemies of Israel, there will be peace. He will rule from Jerusalem. He will be in the land. God himself will dwell in the midst of them. And that is cause for great rejoicing. And so maybe look forward to these things, because if you know the Lord as your Savior, we are told we will rule and reign with him in that kingdom. But we should also be burdened for those that that don't know Jesus as their Savior. It was a blessing sharing this class with you. May the Lord bless you. Shalom.